Hi, so this is the vocal techniques for non-vocal singers. As I talked about in the introduction video, singing, and especially choral singing, has been linked to calming us down more because of the deep breathing techniques that we use. So in this video, I just wanted to go over that because you should be using this throughout the entire time you sing and learn songs with me, because that's a technique of choral singing. So the first thing that choral singers learn is about our diaphragm. Our diaphragm is about right here, and it's underneath our rib cage, and when we breathe, it pulls down and out and contracts back in. So that's one of the things that you learn to use. Instead of using your shoulders, you learn to use your diaphragm. Breathing with your diaphragm, for singing at least, allows us to take in more air and have more control over it. So when you guys are singing, it's really useful to put one hand on your stomach and one hand on your side or your back so that you really feel your diaphragm moving. So let's try breathing with our diaphragm, and I'll give you a few techniques and few exercises to try and start using your diaphragm. Let's start first with trying to use our diaphragm. So place one hand on your stomach and one hand on your side or your back, and I will turn to the side and I will show you how my diaphragm goes in and out every time I breathe. And just watch for now, don't really try it, just look at how my stomach goes in and out. So So as you can see, my diaphragm is moving in and out, and try this at home. You can try breathing in and out and just really feeling your stomach moving all the way out and expanding rather than your shoulders. If you were breathing with your shoulders, it would look kind of like this, where everything in your shoulder is moving, it's moving up, but we want to breathe with our diaphragm, so that means breathing in and out through our stomach. One of the exercises that I was taught to use when I was just learning to breathe with my diaphragm was one hand on my stomach, one hand on my side, and we would just hiss. So this hissing thing is where we breathe in, we hold it for a couple counts, and then we hiss out. So for example, I'll try it. So this exercise is really helpful with air control because you're controlling how much air you let out with each hiss. Another exercise that I was taught was to kind of do like a contracting thing. So my teacher explained it to me as like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Every time you press the Pillsbury Doughboy's stomach, it would pop back out. So kind of think of it like that, but you would just put one hand on your stomach, one hand on your side, and go. Every time you are going through one of those pulses, you should feel your diaphragm moving in and out, in and out, in and out really quickly, rather than the slow hiss, because you're trying to make your diaphragm work faster. Obviously, you can do this a little bit slower once you're first starting out because you might not have experience using your diaphragm, but those two are really helpful when you are just starting to learn, and I recommend doing them a couple times a day. If you are not busy or anything, it's really helpful to do those, and you can do them sitting on the couch or standing up or whatever. The next thing we learn about is placement. So placement is essentially how we sing certain vowels in our mouth, and I was taught this by kind of anatomy. So our hard palate in our mouth is right behind our teeth, and you can try and feel it. So it's right behind our teeth. And then our soft palate is further back in our mouth, and it's about right here inside of our mouth. And every time choral singers sing, their soft palate is raised. So what that means is if you imagine you have an Oreo and it's vertically shaped, and you imagine it in your mouth, in the back of your mouth, then you kind of just drop your jaw and there's a bunch of space back there. So if you want to try it, you would just do this. So all of this right then was raised. It's a really healthy way of singing, and it's also one of the reasons why choral singers sound so different from any other singer. Another technique that choral singers use is learning scales. So we learn scales by just doing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and that helps us to stay in tune, to stay in a key. And for our purposes, you don't necessarily need to know that, but I just thought I would share it for anybody who is interested. The last thing I will talk about is head voice and resonation. So your head voice is kind of like a falsetto. A lot of people who are new to music can call it a falsetto, but girls and guys have a head voice, and that just means accessing higher registers or accessing higher notes, but doing it in a healthy way, not, forcing it out of our throat, but thinking of it as light and airy. A resonation is kind of where the sound comes from. And that might be a little confusing because you might think like, oh, the sound is coming from our vocal cords, but it's a little bit more involved than that. It's kind of thinking of where the sound is coming out of. So generally, you want your resonation to be right about here, kind of in your T-zone. You want to feel the vibration going through you. It kind of goes along with the head voice because you are accessing higher notes or lower notes, but for choral singers, we want to make sure our tone is good. So we often think of our resonators, so right about here, as a place where our sound comes out of. That might be a little conceptual because generally we think of our vocal cords as where the sound comes out of, but in this case, the sound resonates from our resonators. To recap, we talked about breathing, which is super important, and I cannot stress it enough. You should always be breathing with your diaphragm. And again, if you want to just try breathing in, let's do it together. So put one hand on your stomach, one hand on your side or your back, and breathe in. So I suggest looking at yourself in the mirror while you're doing this sometimes, because if your shoulders move at all, then you are not breathing with your diaphragm. They should move a little, but not a whole lot. Also, let's try the exercises. So place one hand on your stomach and one hand on your side, and let's try hissing. So breathe in, hold for a couple seconds, and then hiss out. So breathe in. Great job. Keep trying that by yourself. I know it's a little bit hard to just fit in an exercise kind of anywhere, but it's really helpful, especially if you're going on to learn the videos, that you know how to breathe with your diaphragm, because choral singing is completely based on your diaphragm. We don't breathe with our shoulders or anything. Now let's try doing the Pillsbury Doughboy exercise. So place one hand on your stomach, one hand on your side or your back, and breathe in. So obviously you can stop whenever and just try to keep getting faster and faster. That way your diaphragm is pulsing. Another thing we talked about is the Oreo metaphor with our soft palate. Remember, your hard palate is right behind your teeth, but our soft palate is really important because if we want to sing healthy, our soft palate has to be raised, and it's how choral singers learn how to sing. You don't have to sing it like this. I know a lot of people watching this might not be choral singers naturally, so don't worry about that. But if you wanted to know how to sound like a choral singer, that's the first kind of thing we learn about tone and all that stuff. So then another thing we talked about is scales and how they're useful to choral singers. And the last thing we talked about is our sound and our resonation. So again, our resonators are right here, and when we want ourselves to sound a certain way, we generally want to think of our resonators and the song flowing out of our resonators because it's a healthy way of singing. And again, head voice is kind of like a falsetto, but it's a way to access our higher notes. I suggest going back to the breathing section so that you can really understand and try doing the exercises, and I hope you go on to watch the videos. So thank you.